Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me here in the Citadel with what's left of today's topic, Liberty Prime. So, Liberty Prime is the largest robot you'll encounter in Fallout, so I thought we could save him for last in the Robotics Expert series. So he was designed and built to be an asset for the US Army, but he wasn't completed in time to achieve what he was supposed to achieve. So now he works for the Brotherhood of Steel, who have convinced him that both the Enclave and the Institute are both communist China. So how did this come about? Well, Liberty Prime was built with one purpose in mind: to spearhead the liberation of Anchorage, Alaska from the Chinese occupation. It was a giant death robot in essence, and it was a collaborative effort between the US Army, Robco and General Atomics. So in Fallout New Vegas you do see pictures of Robert House standing in front of a giant robot that definitely looks like either Liberty Prime itself or an early prototype that was built. So with the legs and things, you can kind of see standing in front of just the robot's legs. So the project began in 2072, but by 2077 they'd failed to actually complete the project. So Liberty Prime was never deployed to Alaska. So there was a project summary here. So the goal was the most powerful combat robot the battlefield has ever seen, with the express goal of liberating occupied Anchorage, Alaska from its Chinese aggressors. However, they had started advertising their secret super weapon, and there was propaganda posters out there that claimed that China had super robots called War Machine, so the US had to build their own in order to defeat them. So, Liberty Prime will be the very embodiment of American military might, a walking, talking, nuke-tossing hero who will remind the world what it means to be a superpower. And this comes from General Constantine Chase, who was obviously in charge of the US military during the war until obviously everything went to hell during 2077. So fully confident that the presence of Liberty Prime at the Anchorage front line will be to the Chinese what the Hiroshima bomb was to the Japanese in 1945. So this was kind of their next version of the Manhattan Project in essence, in that way, that they had this secret super weapon that they were developing that was going to win the war, and it was all going to be great. But the problem that they were having is, this is a letter from the scientist that was in charge of the project, Dr. Stanley Bloomfield. So the problem that they were having is that, they've got the chassis complete, weapon systems are online, and the voice module has been programmed as requested, but power consumption is a primary concern, and neither Drs. Honeywell nor Park have found an acceptable solution. So they were having a problem with power management, so all the systems, the weapon systems, the mobility systems, the voice module, the AI and everything that was in Liberty Prime was taking up too much power. And they couldn't find a solution that was sufficient for all the onboard systems that would also be compact enough to allow Prime the mobility that he would need. So we can find the details here that, he can walk and talk. He said no, it's not going to be ready in 3 months because he could walk and talk, but his weapon systems wouldn't be online. So they had a bit of an issue there. I think the quote might be later in this note, saying that maybe he could just stomp on the Chinese soldiers instead. So he wanted to get help from Vault-Tec. Specifically, he wanted to get help from Dr. Stanislaus Braun, who was obviously a very well-known scientist that worked for Vault-Tec, but he's gone into seclusion, working on his own project, which we know is Vault 112, and tormenting people in the simulation in Vault 112, which is what he was doing. Vault 112 was sealed before the bombs. Based on the sort of dates and things in the game, it's estimated to be 2075 was when that vault was sealed, so it was early. Kind of like what happened with Vault 4, I think, where the people went into the vault a few years before it was needed to test it out. And that seems to have been the case with Vault 112. So that meant that Dr. Braun wasn't reachable, so he couldn't help solve these power problems. So they can't find a power source that's small enough and powerful enough to have all the systems online to get Liberty Prime going. In 3 months, we might be able to guarantee the robot can walk into downtown Anchorage, but all of his weapon systems will be offline. Maybe it can just step on the Red Chinese. So this was the suggestion. So obviously, General Chase was putting a lot of pressure on these scientists to get this robot sorted and get them working, but he's saying, look, we can't get help from Dr. Braun. We can't find a solution. We can't do it, basically, in the time frame that you're expecting. It just can't be done. So that left the military to rely on their power armour and whatever else they had at their disposal to win the campaign in Alaska, which we know they did eventually, shortly before the bombs happened. So Liberty Prime was left here to gather dust in the bowels of the Pentagon for about 180 years. And then, yeah, so there's diagnostic reports here. So the Brotherhood came along, and that happened in about 2255 when Elder Owen Lyons led his Brotherhood expedition to what was left of Washington DC. So they set up shop here in the Pentagon, which was heavily damaged on the surface but fairly intact underneath, and most of the kind of outer ring is still intact, but it had sustained quite a bit of damage on the surface. So they discovered Liberty Prime down here, but they decided, you know what, this giant Doom robot is going to be really useful. So the scribes were tasked with getting Liberty Prime working again, particularly Scribe Rothschild is in charge of that project. But 20 years later, they're still struggling to solve the power problems. It doesn't seem to matter what they tried. They couldn't get Prime to allow power to be diverted from his weapon systems, and he kind of gave up on this and decided to focus on the accelerated vector fusion module that would meet the full power that Prime systems demanded. So essentially, they couldn't find a way to balance the power usage between all the systems, so he concluded that they were going to have to basically meet the power demand of all the systems 100% in order to get the robot to work. So they did do some experiments. So this result is from May of 2277, I think. And we couldn't get the mobility going or the navigation. Internal processors at 46%, weapon systems at 45%, power management 37%, and the voice module 100%, because the voice module's always at 100%. But he's confident that by redistributing power from the weapons and mobility subsystems, we can bring power management up to at least 67%. Enough to successfully carry out a full activation sequence. So yeah, it's not going great because we go into July, new full diagnostic, and they've managed to kind of make it even worse, except for the voice module. It's always fine, so Prime can spout all his anti-communist propaganda and catchphrases. But yeah, so the power capacitor didn't work. So they're ceasing all experiments that involve rerouting the power from any of the robot subsystems. So that's kind of the thing. And then the current one, yeah, the power management issues are solved. Everything else should come online and be acceptable. So that's kind of what they've been struggling with. And this is Rothschild's own kind of journal about it. So they were working on the accelerated vector fusion, but it wasn't really going very well. And they also had a couple of incidents in August of 2277. So Scribe Bowditch suffered second-degree burns, suffered an injury, and an accidental weapons discharge nearly killed Elder Lyons. And unsurprisingly, Elder Lyons wasn't too happy about that. So there was limitations put on what experiments they could carry out. But they eventually made kind of limited progress, but you know, they needed some help. So during the plot of Fallout 3, you obviously go to try and activate Project Purity at the Jefferson Memorial, and after the Enclave sees Project Purity and James, the protagonist's father, dies, Dr. Madison Lee brings the Lone Wanderer here to the Citadel to demand help to retake the Jefferson Memorial from the Brotherhood. Dr. Lee doesn't like the Brotherhood very much, but she knows that there's nobody else in the wasteland that's powerful enough to stand up against the Enclave, and her experience and knowledge in fusion research finally got Prime's power issues resolved. So, although Scribe Rothschild at the beginning, when they're activating Prime, says, "Oh, it might not work, we haven't tested it, it's not ready." But usually Prime does work once he's deployed to cut through the Enclave's forces like a hot knife through butter, to succeed in the battle for Project Purity. So that all works very well. Usually, unfortunately, that part of the quest does have a habit of bugging out, so it's kind of but most of the time Prime works, smashes through all the Enclaves, blows up some vertibirds, and you take the Jefferson Memorial back and get Project Purity running, and everything is all hunky-dory. So after that happened, the Brotherhood used Prime around the wasteland to kind of clean up the last of the Enclave's forces across the wasteland, and kind of tidy that up and draw a line under it. And it was pretty successful until it came to the satellite relay station at Rockland, which you have to go through. I think it's a Rockland car tunnel for that, yeah. So you have to go through there, and then that takes you to a separate kind of area. But Prime basically managed to punch a hole, literally, in the facility, creating a big gap that you could all get in. But the Enclave were prepared. They've obviously been sick of this robot destroying everything that they've built, so they had a plan, and it was a trap essentially. So missiles were launched from the Bradley Hercules orbital weapons platform, and that destroyed the giant Doom robot. He died so that democracy may live, or something. And that meant that the Brotherhood had to rely on the protagonist, the Lone Wanderer, to finally defeat the Enclave. And after that all happened, Scribe Rothschild immediately began work on rebuilding Prime, but the lack of progress meant that the project had to be shelved for a little while anyway. So now we move on to the events of Fallout 4. So I'm going to head quickly over to the Commonwealth, and I'll join you there in just a second. There we go. So we're back here at Boston Airport. I just kind of jumped down from the Pridwin. So this is my main playthrough where I did the Brotherhood ending. Am I over encumbered? No. Okay. So here he is in all his glory. So this is actually Liberty Prime Mark II, because as we saw in the Citadel, he kind of got destroyed, so they had to kind of rebuild him. So what happened was Scribe Rothschild was kind of ready to start rebuilding Prime again, but they had to shelve the project because they weren't making much progress, and for a little while, until Arthur Maxon took over as Elder. So obviously Elder Lyons, Owen Lyons died, and then Sarah succeeded him, and then died shortly after in the same year, and they had a whole thing with some ineffectual leaders until Arthur Maxon came along and became the Elder. So he ordered Proctor Ingram to start reviving the project to rebuild Liberty Prime and getting back up and running again. It took them quite a long time, but it became a higher priority after the Brotherhood got word from Recon Squad Gladius, which is Paladin Dance's squad, that confirmed that there was some weird energy readings, and that kind of confirmed the existence and the location of the Institute. So Liberty Prime was bundled onto the Pridwin and brought here to Boston so that they could finish rebuilding him and deploy him against the Institute, which can be successful with a little bit of help, because obviously you're a video game protagonist, so the person that wins tends to be the person that the player character helps the most. It's just the way these things work. So they needed the beryllium agitator. So you have to fend off the Institute in order to claim the one that's at mass fusion, which is one of the main quests that you do. So that is kind of the point of no return, where you decide to either side with the Institute or side with the Brotherhood, and then you'll be enemies with the other faction. So that's kind of a point of no return in the main story, where you have to collect that from mass fusion and bring it here for Liberty Prime, or take it to the Institute for their fancy new reactor, which is the big secret thing that is just really so they can keep the lights on, But if you side with the Brotherhood, then you're also tasked with convincing Dr. Lee to leave the Institute and help with the power problems. So again, even the rebuild version, they're still having issues with power management for all of Liberty Prime systems, because they obviously want his weapons on board, but he has to be able to stomp around and be majestic while he's doing it. And as we know from Fallout 3, Dr. Lee doesn't really like the Brotherhood. She works with them when she's forced to, but she's not a fan, she doesn't trust them. But they know that she came to the Institute because she worked with the Brotherhood on Liberty Prime and Project Purity, and then she ended up leaving and coming up here to join the Institute, which presumably she learned about from Dr. Zimmer, who was hanging around pestering her at the lab in Rivet City. But if you give her proof of what happened to Brian Virgil and how it was covered up and hidden from her, then she will agree to leave and defect, and she'll come to the Brotherhood. So she has a lot of kind of knowledge and experience of Liberty Prime and his systems and how it all works. So that's kind of the reason that the Brotherhood want to recruit her again, is because she knows Liberty Prime. She's worked on him before, so her expertise is definitely essential to them, and they find it kind of more difficult to get Prime going without her, but they do actually manage to do that. If you don't side with the Brotherhood, which is interesting. And of course the opposite's also true. If you side with the Institute, then Dr. Lee will use her knowledge of Liberty Prime to turn him against the Brotherhood and reprogram him to bring down the Brotherhood, to bring down the Pridwin instead. So yeah, sure. So they basically reprogram him using a synth virus to target the Pridwin and blow it up, which is pretty effective. But the one thing that Liberty Prime never really drops is his patriotism and his anti-communist catchphrases. He's quite handy to have in a battle. I mean, look at the size of him. He's really good to have on your side in a battle. Surely you would want to have the giant death robot on your side, stomping around the battlefield and blowing things up, rather than being against them in any capacity. But after you've defeated the Institute, he just kind of paces around outside the airport forever until I guess they decide what they're going to use him for next. But it's a very interesting robot, because this was obviously supposed to be, the US Army's kind of ace in the hole, that this is how they were going to take back Anchorage and kick the Chinese out and all the rest of it. But because they were struggling with the power problems, and a specific scientist that could have helped them was too busy setting up his creepy little simulation where he tortures people for all of eternity, so he wasn't available to help them. So then they had no way of figuring it out in time and had to use other things that they had in order to reclaim Anchorage and get the Chinese defeated. And then obviously everything kind of went to hell anyway. So yeah, but I like Liberty Prime. He's fun. He's, he kind of definitely inspired by a few different things, I think, including like Robocop. Certainly his head and everything's very kind of Robocop like to my mind. But yeah, I like him. He's fun, and as much as he makes the march to the Jefferson Memorial in Fallout 3 kind of trivial, because you don't really need to do anything because he's just so damn powerful. That's why at the start of Broken Steel they kind of had to blow him up, because he was too much of an advantage, and that would mean that you didn't really need to do any work in order to fully defeat the Enclave and things. But it's quite fun, and it does seem to fit with this version of the US military and the US government and everything, when they were obviously in this protracted war against the Chinese and everything. And there was an arms race, kind of like when they started the Manhattan Project and everything during World War II. and it was this race to find the solution that was going to end the war, and that's certainly kind of what pushed Japan into surrendering and ending the war that way and things. And Liberty Prime was obviously this version of the US Army's kind of solution when they were dealing with the Chinese, and they had the stealth armor and they had all these different things. So the US Army, you know, they developed the power armor, so the Chinese started making electrified fields around their places they wanted to defend so that the power armor wouldn't work. So this was potentially a solution, but just they couldn't get those pesky power problems sorted out in time. But eventually, a couple of hundred years later, someone managed to figure it out and get him going. So I do like Liberty Prime a lot. I think he's quite a fun addition. And yeah, I do just enjoy him stomping about. He's not saying as much. In Fallout 3, he's a lot more vocal with his, you know, his patriotism, subroutines and whatnot. So, you know, yes, thank you. I appreciate the compliments and stuff, guys. Really, it's very kind of you. But yeah, so that's Liberty Prime. Definitely a fun addition, and I think, yeah, he makes things a bit more interesting and dramatic, and that's kind of fun, and it just kind of goes to show, you know, the Brotherhood, they love technology as long as they're the ones that are in charge of it. You know, if it wasn't them that had Liberty Prime, if it was somebody else like the Enclave, say, or the Institute or some other faction, then they wouldn't tolerate it. They would find a way to destroy this thing, but because they own it, that makes it okay, because that's the way the Brotherhood works. But yeah. Surely this is just wasting power to just have him stomping about here, like, but yeah. Anyway, that's Liberty Prime. So that's us pretty much finished all the robots. So hopefully now you have, if you followed this the whole way, you've earned your robotic expert perk. So congratulations on that. And as of next week, we are going to be picking up some human variations. So I did touch briefly on the ghouls and things when we did the Immortality series, but I wanted to get a bit more into the kind of biology behind the ghouls, how they work, how they, you know, obviously we don't have that in real life, so a lot of this might be kind of more speculative science based on what we do know in real life. But I think there's some interesting conversations to be had around the ghouls and their protracted lifespans and the fertilization process, and the fact that there does seem to be now some medication that they can use that delays the fertilization process and things like that. I actually had a couple of thoughts about that while I was in the shower today. So showers, in the shower is always my best place for thinking, but kind of inconvenient because I don't have a way of writing down all the thoughts until I come out the shower. But that's just the way my brain works. But I think there's some really interesting things to be talked about, and we've also got things like there's the trogs in the pit and the wild men, the swamp folk from Point Lookout, the tunnelers from Lonesome Road, and there's quite a few other ones as well. So we're going to get into some of the mutated humans and the biology and things and how that sort of thing came about. So that should be very, very interesting. So look out for the first part of that next Saturday. On Tuesday, we're going to look at the Velvet Curtain quest and Point Lookout and some of the locations that sends us to, because I think that's quite a fun little quest where you take on a espionage job and finish it because the person supposed to do it never managed to do it. And it is a quest that brings a lot of good rewards for you, so it's worth looking into. So we're going to go through that on Tuesday, so hopefully you'll come back for that, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.